Thank you very much for having me. I'm going to talk in brief about some work that I've been doing in collaboration with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime in London, looking at, for the first time, attrition through the criminal justice system of cases involving a male victim and a male perpetrator, because, as Liz has briefly touched upon, in the UK you can only be charged with rape if you're a man, unless you're an accessory. So the basic background is that a number of reviews, and I must stress not nearly enough still, we still need more research on this topic in general, but a number of reviews have investigated and identified factors and case characteristics that are implicated in criminal justice outcomes involving female victims. And one of the most famous academic examples of this is Holland Stanko's 2015 very impactful paper that actually used case characteristics to predict routes of attrition in the criminal justice system. And unfortunately, within that sample, they had to exclude the male sample because it was too small, because fewer men reported their rape across their timescale than women did. However, because there's such little research on the progression of cases involving male victims, what we are in danger of is applying findings that relate to female victims to victims as a whole, whereas actually men could have unique vulnerabilities, case factors that influence their route through the criminal justice system. And so at the moment, the kind of guidance, any policy, and the research is not very gender-informed in that sense, because we view the victims of rape and sexual assault predominantly as women, which they are, according to statistics, about 90%. However, for that 10%, and that equates to around 12,000 rape and serious sexual assaults every year in England and Wales for men, we don't know enough about those cases in order to make informed decisions about training and policy when working with men. And therefore, we may be missing sex-specific challenges to the investigation and prosecution, which are currently unexplored. And one of the reasons why this is so important is that there's been a lot of work on rape myths, so beliefs that we have about rape that aren't necessarily true but serve to exonerate the perpetrator and blame the victim. There's been a lot of work about how those rape myths might influence the progression of cases of women, but there is a very unique set of rape myths concerning men, and they are not explored at all. So lots of beliefs regarding sexuality, regarding pleasure responses, regarding trauma, regarding its occurrence. So one of the principal male rape myths is that men aren't raped, which obviously we know is not true, but none of those have been explored in any way in terms of case data. So we wanted to go about providing some preliminary research to address that. And one of the reasons why I really want to stress this is not as much research in and of itself, it is a call to arms to do more research, is because the data that this is based on is fairly atrocious in terms of its quality. In psychology, we have a term that's the noisiness of data, and this was like being at a rave. Yeah, there was a lot of issues in terms of this data. Just to give some insight, we're coding data from 7 different years, so 8 different years, 2005 to 2012. Each data set was coded using a different coding framework. So I was sent 7 different data files. I had to parse them across their different coding frameworks. And then once I'd done all my analysis, I was told by the Met that I was actually sent 2 of them in error, and they were actually just replications of the other years. Then I had to remove them and redo everything. So this is a starting point, not an end point. However, we have been able to get some really interesting data. And what was done in this study by a coding team was that they coded these cases for various victim, suspect, offence, and procedural characteristics. And I don't have a lot of time to go into what those characteristics are, but for victim, it would be demographic things like age. For suspect, similar. Offence characteristics are things to do with the context of the crime. So did anybody voluntarily consume alcohol? Where did it occur? And then procedural characteristics will be things like, did that person attend a haven? Were they administered an early evidence kit or an EEK? And the outcome was also coded. And by outcome, we mean outcomes that can occur within the police stage of investigation. So our final outcome was a referral to the CPS, whereas obviously we know there are outcomes beyond that, but we couldn't code for them in this study. So there were some interesting results, and the first kind of most striking is what we have here is the percentage of cases that was awarded this particular outcome. And what I've done is I've put in brackets the percentages for female cases from the Holland-Stanko review. And immediately you can see some stark differences and some interesting similarities. The first is probably withdrawal. So men, once they have reported and are in the system, are much less likely to withdraw their case than women are. So about 60% of cases that are reported with a female victim end up in withdrawal by the victim themselves, whereas that's only 15% for male victims. And correspondingly, the other percentages are therefore higher than the female. So the percentage of no crimes that get afforded to male victims is higher than female victims. And that's where police have determined that no crime took place based on evidence presented to them. No further action, so getting a case where the police can no longer do anything because they can't progress it to the CPS, is about 3 times more likely in male cases than it is in female cases, which again suggests some particular barrier in some way to maybe progressing to the CPS. But the converse picture is that actually more cases, not a massive amount more, but more cases get progressed to the CPS. So that this initial, just this table, should show you that there is a reason we should be looking at male cases as, in a gender-informed way, in a way that looks at male cases separately to female cases and then as victims altogether, because clearly there are different patterns here. Why this is, we're still kind of exploring, but differences are there, and I think we need to kind of take them into account. Also, that missing 32 cases being missing, those were some of the better missing numbers that we saw, so that should give you a further indication. And then in terms of what these cases, the kind of typologies that we're seeing, we brought together the data to produce victim, suspect, case, and case processing typologies. And what we saw that victims on average were 23 years old at the time of their victimization, and 24 and a half years old at the time of reporting. That those aren't the same people. So some people had a longer gap, some people had a shorter gap. And the range of that data ranged from 3 years old up to 68, and we didn't differentiate between child sexual exploitation and adult cases in this study because there wasn't the numbers to do so. And they typically had not previously reported a crime or made a false report in the past and did not directly report having mental health issues, although that doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't have them. Suspects had an average age of 32 at the time of the offence, roughly on average 9 years older than victims. A smaller proportion of the suspects were aged under 18 at the time of the incident compared to victims, and they usually also did not report having any mental health issues, and they were more often than not known to the victim. In terms of the offence, male cases were rarely related to domestic violence, which is a big difference to female cases, because around 40% of rapes that are reported by women have a DV flag associated with them. These offences, male offences, did typically involve a weapon, rarely involved a weapon and rarely involved more than one perpetrator. They predominantly occurred in a known location, typically the victim or suspect's address. And prior to the incident, most victims and suspects had not voluntarily consumed any alcohol or drugs, and most victims reported that they had not been drugged at the time of the incident. And most victims had no injuries to report, around 75%, and of those who did, the majority of the injuries were minor. Procedurally, men were equally likely to report within the first 24 hours as they were to report after the 24-hour window, and most of them were reported by the victim directly. The majority of victims were sure that the incident had occurred, and in a small proportion of cases, suspects alleged the victim gave consent or denied the incident occurred. And less than 1/3 of men were administered an early evidence kit, received a medical exam, or attended a haven. And what we were able to do with this sample, again preliminarily, is, and this is just for the victim characteristics, so there are more tables, but I didn't have time to put them in. But what we were able to do is run some chi-square analysis, which is basically looking at probabilities, that if you're in group X or Y, how likely is it that you'll end up with outcome A or B. So, for example, for age at the time of the incident, what the chi-square analysis is asking is, based on whether you are under or over 18, does that significantly affect your chances of ending up with or without a no crime? with a no crime. So you can see here that if you are over 18, you have a higher percentage likelihood of ending up with a no crime than you do if you were under 18. So that can suggest to us preliminarily that maybe there's something about being under 18 that protects you from getting a no crime outcome. That's the assertions that you can make from that. Same here, you can see that if you have a mental health issue, you have a higher percentage of no crimes than if you don't have a mental health issue. So again, we can suggest there, maybe there's something about having a mental health issue that leads to that outcome. Don't know what it is, but we can, at least with the data, we can start making some guesses. And so we can see here that no crime outcomes and CPS outcomes are the ones that tend to be most affected. So, preliminary conclusions. Firstly, we haven't been able to do a lot with this data because, again, like I said, it was very noisy, very messy. But the limited things that we have been able to do is through cross-comparing them to the Holland-Stanko work that was done, we actually see that a lot of the victim and suspect profiles share many similarities, which I think is really interesting because it suggests maybe there are some shared vulnerabilities across male and female victims. However, the offence context and the investigatory responses show a lot more variation. So, for example, many, many less men received early evidence kits and attended havens compared to female victims. And that is going to be hugely crucial because havens and EEKs are where you get most of your forensic evidence that would allow you to advance a case to the CPS. There are also really interesting differences, like I said, in terms of outcome. So what those outcome numbers suggest to me is that once men are in the system and have overcome an initial barrier to report, and we know that men are likely to report their rate to a less extent than women, once they've overcome that initial barrier, they're more likely to voluntarily stay in the process than perhaps women are. And the way that we can use this, the reason this is even interesting, beyond just being interesting, is that we can then use the data to isolate key variables of interest. Because if you see that something has no effect on the outcome that's given, then that just suggests that that variable has no impact and that it's down to chance what outcome you end up with. But if there's something that says, look, if this is present or absent, and this results in a higher likelihood of a CPS referral, we need to target that. We need to get police training there. We need to make sure that our response is appropriate. And so we can really use this data to isolate those specific case factors and can be used to target training. I just want to acknowledge my collaborators and the Mayor's Office, and just to say we're updating this review. We've just done a huge review of 2016 data, so hopefully we'll be able to get something a little bit more usable and subject it to all sorts of other analyses. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that talk, Ben. In your chasing down of the attrition data, did I understand correctly you'd stopped at the point of referral to CPS, or did you chase down prosecutions and convictions as well?
I'll very briefly summarise that it's incredibly difficult because the police and the CPS use different case management systems, and they also use a management system that allows them to interact. So you've got Chris, Copper, and the CMS for the CPS, and there are lots of different challenges in that. So for this data, because it was something that we were given, we've just been working with what we've got. We have been talking to the CPS for our current review in order for them to pair outcome data when it gets to court, because obviously that is a key indicator of success within the criminal justice system. And yeah, we are looking to track that data down.
Yeah, normally attrition ends at the process of conviction. That's the normal definition, isn't it?
Well, within the academic literature, so when we look at the attrition problem, what we need to do is view the whole process as being like this bucket, and in terms of the academics, well, certainly all the literature that I've read, attrition is defined as at any point within the criminal justice system where cases appear to fall out for whatever reason. So we're looking to pinpoint all of those different, and actually the police stage is worthy of our investigation because around 60% of cases in both male and female involving male and female victims fall out within the police stage. So we really need to understand what's informing police decision making, what training are they getting, and how can we improve it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben.
Thank you.